come in. Hello. Come on. You going to join us? Don't look at me like that. Come on. Sit down. Come on. Good evening. So before we get started on the next chapter of Three Men and a Boat, I thought it might be worthwhile just to touch base with everybody and see how you're doing. I know that the world's gone a little bit sideways at the moment. I hope that everyone at home is keeping safe and that you're looking out for each other. One of the things that I've seen an awful lot of as I go to work at the moment is people seem to genuinely be more tolerant of each other, and they're definitely being kinder and more accepting of each other. I hope that both you've been able to receive that and also extend that same to other people. Hopefully we're not going to be having to deal with this for too many more weeks. The British government has just announced a further 3 weeks of lockdown at least, but that's being done to help prevent anything getting further and hopefully bring us all out safe of this on the other side. So with that brief diversion, I think His Lordship here is perhaps not going to be sitting with us for very long. We'll begin. Chapter 16 of Three Men in a Boat. Okay. Now, are you going to make a choice? You going to stay or go? Okay. Chapter 16. Reading. We are towed by steam launch. Irritating behaviour of small boats. How they get in the way of the steam launch. George and Harris again shirk their work. A rather huck-eyed story. Straightly and Goring. My word, you're giving an awful lot of noise this evening. I don't know if that's coming through on the microphone, but he's really giving it a purr at the moment. So, we came in sight of Reading at about 11. The river is dirty and dismal here. One does not linger in the neighbourhood of Reading. The town itself is a famous old place, dating from the dim days of King Ethelred, when the Danes anchored their warships in the Kennet, and started from the Reading to ravage all the land of Wessex. And here Ethelred and his brother Alfred fought and defeated them. Ethelred doing the praying and Alfred doing the fighting. In later years, Reading seemed to be regarded as a handy place to run down to when matters were becoming unpleasant in London. The Parliament generally rushed off to Reading whenever there was a plague on at Westminster, and in 1625 the law followed suit, and that all the courts were held in Reading. It must have been worthwhile having a mere ordinary plague now and then in London to get rid of both the lawyers and the Parliament. During the parliamentary struggle, Reading was besieged by the Earl of Essex, and a quarter of a century later, the King of Orange routed King James's troops there. Henry I lies buried at Reading, and in the Benedictine Abbey founded by him there, the ruins of which may still be seen. And in this same abbey, the great John of Gaunt was married to the Lady Blanche. At Reading Lock we came up with a steam launch belonging to some friends of mine, and they towed us up to within about a mile of Straightley. It was delightful being towed up by a launch. I prefer it myself to rowing. The run would have been more delightful still if it had not been for a wretched number of small boats that were continually getting in the way of our launch, and to avoid running them down, we had to continually ease and stop. It is really most annoying the manner in which these rowing boats get in the way of one's launch up the river. Something ought to be done to stop it. And they are so confoundedly impertinent too. You can whistle till you nearly burst your boiler before they all trouble themselves to hurry. I would have one or two of them run down, if I'd had my way, just to teach them all a lesson. The river becomes a lovely little thing from above Reading. The railway rather spoils it near Tilehurst, but from Maple Durham up to Stately it is glorious. A little above Maple Durham Lock you pass Hardwick House, where Charles I played bowls. The neighbourhood of Pashbourne, where the quaint little Swan Inn stands, must be familiar to the habitués of the art exhibitions, as it is its own inhabitants. My friend's launch cast us loose just below the grotto, and then Harris wanted to make out that it was my turn to pull. This seemed to me most unreasonable. It had been arranged in the morning that I should bring the boat up to 3 miles above Reading. Well, here we were 10 miles above Reading. Surely it was now their turn again. I could get neither George nor Harris to see the matter in a proper light, however, and so, to save argument, I took the sculls. I had not been pulling for more than a minute or so when George noticed something black floating on the water, and we drew up to it. George leant over as we neared it and laid hold of it. And then he drew back with a cry and a blanched face. It was the dead body of a woman. It lay lightly on the water, with its face sweet and calm. It was not a beautiful face. It was too prematurely aged looking, too thin and drawn to be, but it was a gentle, lovable face, in spite of its stamp of pinch and poverty. And upon it was the look of a restful peace that comes from the faces of the sick sometimes when at last the pain has left them. Fortunately for us, we had no desire to be kept hanging about the coroner's courts. Some men on the bank had seen the body too, and now they took charge of it from us. We found out the woman's story afterwards. Of course, it was the old vulgar tragedy. She had loved and been deceived, or had deceived herself. Anyhow, she had sinned. Some of us do now and then. And her family and friends, naturally shocked and indignant, had closed their doors against her. Left to fight the world alone, with this millstone of shame around her neck, she had sunk ever lower and lower. For a while she had kept both herself and the child on the 12 shillings a week that 12 hours drudgery a day had procured her, paying 6 shillings out of it for the child, and keeping her own body and soul together on the remainder. 6 shillings a week does not keep a body and soul together very unitedly. They want to get away from each other when there is only so much slight bond as that between them. And one day, I suppose, the pain and the dull monotony of it all had stood before her eyes plainer than usual, and the sickening spectre frightened her. She'd made one last appeal to friends, but against the chill wall of their respectability, the voice of the erring outcast fell unheeded. And then she had gone to see her child, and held it in her arms and kissed it, and in a weary, dull sort of way, and without betraying any particular emotion of any kind, and had left it, after putting it into its hand a penny box of chocolate she had bought it, and afterwards, with her last few shillings, had taken a ticket and come down to Goring. It seemed that the bitterest thoughts of her life must have centred around the wooded reaches and the bright green meadows around Goring. But the woman strangely seemed to hug the knife that stabbed her, and perhaps all the gall there may have mingled also sunny memories of the sweetest hours spent upon those shadowed deeps over which the great trees bend their branches down so low. She had wandered about the woods by the river's brink all day, and then, when the evening fell and the grey twilight spread its dusky robe upon the waters, she stretched her arms out to the silent river that had known her sorrow and her joy. And the old river had taken her into its gentle arms, and had laid her weary head upon its bosom, and hushed away the pain. Thus she had sinned in all things, sinned in living and in dying. God help her, and all sinners, if any more there be. Goring on the left bank, and Straightley on the right, are both either charming places to stay at for a few days. The reaches down to Bangbourne woo one for a sunny sail, or for a moonlight row, and the country around is full of beauty. We'd intended to push on to Wallingford that day, but the sweetest smiling face of the river here lured us to linger for a while. And so we left our boat at the bridge and went up to Straightley and lunched at the Bull, much to Montmorency's satisfaction. They say that the hills on each side of the stream here once joined and formed a barrier across what is now the Thames, and then the river ended here, above Goring, in one vast lake. I'm not in the position to contradict or affirm this statement. I simply offer it. It is an ancient place, Streatley, dating back, like most riverside towns and villages, to British and Saxon times. Goring is not nearly so pretty a little spot to stop at as Streatley, if you have your choice, but it is a fair enough way to pass the time, and is nearer the railway in case you want to slip off without paying your hotel bill. End of chapter 16. Well, that was a much more difficult read than normal. I'm sure you heard occasionally there was a yowling. That was the cat wanting to go outside, and occasionally licking himself as well, but that's just by the by. This is only a short one, so I think it might be worthwhile if we tried to go on to the next chapter as well, but we may be interrupted by the cat once more, in which case I might have to stop recording.